Oh, welcome to another episode of The Growth Compass. Shout out to our sponsor, Senders. If you want to do email deliverability correctly, you hit the link in the description. Without them, it would not be possible to interview awesome people doing really awesome things like Scott. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Blake.
Man, it's so cool. I'm really excited for you to teach everybody about what you're doing, tell a little bit about your story. But at first, before you do that, I want to shout out how I think your logo is really awesome. It's very
Oh,
cool.
thank you very much.
I don't know
It's
how
too
long
bad.
you guys, yeah, I don't know how long you guys have had that logo for, but I did see it. I really appreciated it. I think I saw it on someone's shirt too. You guys have like merch and stuff.
We do.
Yeah, no,
Gotta have
I
swag when
think
you're a startup, right?
yeah, no, I really like it, so I wanted to bring attention to that. So thank you for doing that. But so before we get started, if you could just give a quick introduction of yourself and what you're building.
Absolutely. So I'm Scott Wharton. I'm the CEO of Tandem PV. We are a next generation solar manufacturer in that we make a completely new panel based on material science called perovskites, which we'll get into a whole bunch of that. My background, this is I'm a serial entrepreneur, so clearly there's something wrong with me. I want to keep doing this
Right.
over and over again. And this is my fifth startup scale up in a row. So I did two early stage companies in the voice for IP space, both of them IPO'd. And the second one got sold to Cisco for $2 billion. Then I moved out to California. We were talking about that earlier, where I started the world's first cloud video conferencing service. So I like to say I had the right idea, 3 years before Zoom, but we were a little early. We had a nice exit. And then after three startups, my wife said, would you mind not doing a startup for a while? So I went to a company called Logitech, and then you're using a lot of our gear here.
Right
Uh,
here.
awesome.
Oh, and right here.
Right, I got them all here, and
Yeah.
took a small group doing video conferencing from 62 million to over $1 billion a year organically. We became the world's market leader in Zoom, Microsoft, Google equipment, and I've been here for the last 2 years with the goal of basically, I don't know, solving climate change.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I think given the introduction, this sounds like it'll be one of potentially 50 episodes that we do together, just to extract all the learnings from those different experiences. But well, we can try. So before we get into specifically what you guys are building, the technology, because obviously that's of extreme interest. I love hearing about people with rich experiences that come into what they're currently building, and so there's a lot for you to pull from. But if you want to, whichever one comes off the top of the head at this question, but I'm curious, is there anything? Let's do two specific. Is there anything specific about your prior experience that you bring into this startup, into this adventure, as far as your decisions of how to make product decisions, how to lead a team, how to grow the company? Any two things that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some things that are just consistent, regardless of whether you're doing different types of things. One is working with human beings
Okay.
and how to motivate them and how to make decisions. I think that's a constant throughout any different organization. I think there's a book that some people have listened called Crossing the Chasm, where it talks about just the process of how you go from innovators to early adopters to early majority and then the mainstream. And I think that's true no matter what you're doing. And then I would say just pattern recognition about how people make decisions. How do you have a focused strategy and how do you decide on trade-offs? I think those are all things that I would say I've learned. And, of course, you learn through making lots of mistakes,
Yeah.
which I've made too many to count. But I'd say a lot of that you just keep getting better. And then the other thing I would say is I think when you're younger, you doubt where you are, you doubt your instincts. But I think as you get older, you usually don't look back and say, God, I wish I would have moved slower. Almost never. So just kind of feeling good about your decision, making a decision, moving on, being quick about it. I think if anything, I've kind of you speed it up.
Is there a specific point or lesson that you learned about the concept of working with human beings and keeping them motivated as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them is that it's really important to have a defined and clear strategy, no matter what you're doing. I think what I've seen, especially in the technology industry or deep tech, even worse, is that people who come from a technology industry either underestimate the power of having a go-to-market focus, a customer focus, or it's scary to make a decision. So you go, all right, well, if I pick this, then I'm not picking all these other things.
Hmm.
That's true. But if you don't pick something, then you never really figure out which market is really going to be the right one. So even in this space, I see some of my peers like saying, "What do you sell?" And they go, "I sell a core component." To whom? Anybody. What do you mean anybody? Well, it could be used for this or that or that. And I think we have a very clear focus, for example, on selling solar panels to utility scale customers. We're not doing a million other things. And I think that just gives clarity to the team. So when they wake up every morning, they don't need to ask, like, what am I doing? Which customer is it going for? And I found that as I've gotten deeper into this, having just an incredibly rigorous focus on solving one problem is better than being afraid to kind of make a choice and saying, well, I'm solving two or three or hedging. I think it's one of the most important things that you can do. And then once you do that, the second thing is just hire great people. So it's pretty easy to hire average people. There are a lot of people who are in the middle of the bell curve. Find people who are great, because the reason why that's so important is, one, usually they're probably 10x more talented, or at least more productive. Maybe not talented is the wrong word, than other people. And if you hire really great people, they tend to attract other great people, and it becomes a flywheel. Whereas if you tolerate people who are kind of in the middle, there's nothing wrong with them. Usually you hear people saying, well, they're doing the job. Yeah, but if you have someone who's really great and they go interview for that person who's average, they just won't work for them.
Hmm. Well, is so I really enjoyed that example about what you guys are focusing on specifically now. So is how do you in practice? So you say having a go to market strategy, having a strategy, is one of the ways to keep people motivated because it supports this level of focus that you think is that you're saying is required, which I think is awesome. What does that look like in practice? Is it like a document? Is it in Google Docs? Is it like, I mean, is it something referenceable? How often do you update it? Is it, is how is it in practice, this go to market strategy thing?
So I mean, it's interesting. I don't really have an even Google Doc of a strategy, so I guess we don't have that. I think it's
Nice.
more a matter of if everybody inside the company can't repeat it off the top of their head, then it's confusing.
Yeah.
So it has to be something when you get asked, anybody in the company, what is your strategy? And they can say, oh, we are building full panels that are tandem, so there are two layers, and we're selling it into utility scale customers that build these solar farms. I think everybody in our company can say that. And then what it means is that I don't need to check their work or manage them on those decisions. So every decision they're making is going to reinforce that, as an example. Whereas if you don't know what you're doing, then everybody can go off in different directions. Kind of the analogy of you can have two rowboats, and one team could be stronger than the other, but if they're not sailing in the right direction, they're not going to be as fast. And I would say, I was explaining this to someone the other night. Startups are a team sport, not an individual sport. So really, what it matters is how fast you're going to the place you need to go as a team. So there's a lot of value in making sure that you're all going in the same direction. What I found is if there's confusion or hedging, then you can have an amazing team, but they're wasting a lot of effort and resources to get to where they need to go.
Sure. So the second thing that you mentioned is this idea of crossing from that book, Crossing the Chasm, the different stages of adoption. So in your across your experiences, and to whatever extent you can speak to it with Tandem PV, are there commonalities across how to jump those stages? Is it specific to each startup? Like, is there anything specific, from your experience that maybe isn't talked about in the book, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose a couple of things that come to mind. One is early in my career, we sold to telcos, who are not the most innovative people in the world, right? They're more
Sure.
conservative. So we had to find people who are more innovators in the telecom space, they're more entrepreneurs. And then eventually we knew we wanted to sell into Verizon and AT&T, et cetera. But just knowing that you shouldn't really be wasting your time early with those people because they're going to go last or second. Now we're selling into the utility segment. So also having a similar understanding about, one, what does it take to sell into a large enterprise? And then, I've talked to a lot of early entrepreneurs who said the customer's really interested, or I signed a contract, and I go, that's really just the first part of winning them over. You sign the contract, then you need to work on getting it deployed, and then you have to overcome all these other things. So um, I think the other thing is that sometimes on the Crossing the Chasm, the biggest mistake for people who haven't read it is that you sell to early adopters, techies, And what do they ask for? They ask for features, bells and
Yeah.
whistles, all that other things. And then the things that you need to sell to the early majority are not the same. So they want the opposite of that. So what the book basically says is, if you want to fail, keep listening to your customers, which I know sounds counterintuitive, right? Because you're
Yeah.
supposed to
Yeah.
be very customer led. But your early techie customers, if you tell them, if you say, what do you want? They're going to be like, I need a million new features and bells and whistles. Whereas the mainstream part of the market, they actually want it simpler. They want better economics. They don't want cool shit.
Yeah.
They want it to solve a problem for them. So it means you actually need to ignore your customers and then change tax. I think it's a critical lesson that I got out of that book that I've seen happen. And I've seen people make the mistake over and over and over again where they go, oh, yeah, if we only build these 8,000 features, customers will buy. Nope, it doesn't work.
I love that because I think there are so many things like you said. It sounds counterintuitive because the common practice is listen to your customers. They'll give you the solution to what it is. However, if you're not intentional about how you're listening to your customers, because what you're saying is you can listen to the customers, but there might not be they're the right customers to listen to if you want to sell to more techies. But if you're listening to techies and how to sell to the early majority, then you're mixing up intentions and the focus and the strategy like you're speaking to. So I love that. That is so cool. I think just quick piece of curiosity is out of those 4 or 5 startups you talked about, how many are software? How many are hardware?
First three were software. Uh, and then the third one was a cloud software. So I kind of progressively taught myself to go from on-prem, network, cloud. I would say Logitech, even though we made 99% of our money from hardware, uh, eventually 80% of my engineering team was software. So I would call it like software-led hardware. A lot of the value was in the software, although building physical things that most people know, like webcams or conference rooms, or I'm on my Logi docking, speakerphone
Yeah.
kit. But and now I'm moving more into deep tech, more really much more hardware oriented, although there's some software. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of the irony. I think most people go from hardware to software. I went the other way.
Yeah. Well, what's your perspective between the two? Do you have a preference for either? Or are they completely different, or are there similarities as far as making product decisions, development? I mean, deployment is very different. The sales pipeline is very different. Just top of my head, like what comes to mind for you?
I mean, one of the things I really liked about Logitech is having all people have these physical things in their hands that they were using and getting to
Yeah,
experience them. I thought that was really cool. I
that's
think
cool.
the same reason why did I get into building a solar panel in climate tech? Because a lot of times I'll talk to people in climate tech and they go, or talk to an investor and they go, I'm going to solve climate tech with software. And I go, yeah, it's kind of an earth science problem,
Yeah,
physical thing. So if you really want to solve climate change, doing software is important, but it's on the margins. You need to solve it with things, batteries, panels, etc. I mean, I did love software too because you hit a button and someone just downloads it, so you can have from a distribution point of view, and you can upload your capabilities every day. So that's a lot easier. So I think they have their merits and trade-offs. I kind of like both. I would say part of why I got more into hardware, besides what I just said about climate tech and physical things, is that I tend to want to solve a problem and then do something that's harder and more complicated. So it would be easy for me in a career point of view if I would stayed in software or stayed at Logitech, like I was very comfortable, but I want the
yeah,
next challenge. And sometimes I pick hard things because it's a personal challenge to solve them.
yeah. Well, I think you did it. I think you made a great choice. This stuff is definitely hard. What you're doing. So, and I think that's a great transition because I want to talk about now. This company specifically what you're building. I have this. Your landing page is a shot of the solar panel. I don't know if it's a mechanism. I don't know if it's like you guys have an add-on thing. But if you could go to a little bit more detail about what it is I'm looking at, and anybody else that would go on your website.
Yeah, so we're building a solar panel, which I think people would recognize. The
Okay.
reason why the company is called Tandem PV is that it's actually two layers that work in tandem. So the first layer that we're building is on this new material science called the perovskite. Very good cocktail party reference for everybody listening. So
Got
perovskite's
it.
basically the reason why they're so exciting is that they're 200 times thinner than traditional silicon panels. They don't use any rare earth metals or minerals, no mining. So we actually make it in a lab as an ink. that we put a very thin layer on glass. In fact, it's so thin, it's 1/100th the width of a human hair. That's how thin it is. And that only uses about 10% of the energy compared to making a silicon panel. And we can make it here in the United States. So part of it is most of the supply chain now is coming from China. In some cases, up to 98% of it. So we want to be able to move that back so the US has some control of our own destiny from a supply chain point of view, as well as making it better and cheaper. The other thing that's cool about perovskites, when you put the layer, the bottom layer is a traditional silicon cell. So we essentially buy that off the shelf, we kind of OEM it, and then we create this solar panel sandwich. So our panel is about 28% efficient. To put that in perspective, the average solar panel is about 21%. So it captures roughly about one out of every 5 beams of light. We're capturing about 1 out of every 4. So we're already 30% more efficient. And part of why that's really important is that in a solar farm, the cost of the panels come down so much, and only about 20% of the cost now is the panel. So what are the other costs? Labor, land, installation. So a lot of making the cost of solar energy lower in the United States and other developed places is just you have a panel that's got 30% more density, and then you don't need to install as many, so you could save more on all those other things, the 80% of the costs. So in many ways, we're saving on the cost, not necessarily only on the panel, but where it matters on these other costs to disrupt and keep making energy cheaper. And of course, we're going to need a gazillion amounts more energy because of all the AI demand, which is where our product is really well suited to.
Well, thank you for that. How long ago did this company start? How long ago were you involved? Did you start it?
Yeah, so the company was founded about 9 years ago. It was right around the time where perovskites are first getting going. One of our founders, Colin Bailey, built the first perovskite cell when he was at Stanford doing his PhD in material science. He partnered up with another guy named Chris Eberspacher, who had more than 40 years experience in solar. So he also has a PhD from Stanford in applied physics, not very smart guys.
Right.
So part of why I was attracted to them is they were not only very smart, but also had a lot of experience in how to practically build this stuff. Because what I found is in the deep tech space, you have a lot of people who can build a prototype, but actually being able to build something that is manufacturable and scalable that's in many ways that's the hardest part.
So at what point? I mean, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure you guys are selling. You guys are revenue driven, commercialized things like this.
Not yet. So what I would say is when I came in, we were an R&D company. Essentially, I came in to help the company transition to become a commercial stage company. So since then, our performance got better. We've hired out the team. We announced, I think about 4 months ago, that we raised $50 million in venture funding, combination of venture equity and debt.
Congrats.
Awesome. And in 4 weeks from now, from when we're doing this taping, we're going to move into our new factory and start building these big panels that our plan is to start selling sometime next year.
Scott, this is awesome. And okay, this is a fascinating thing for me because I am so interested in your mindset around coming into a company at this stage. And I guess some context, and it is tied to your area of the United States, is I'm fascinated by commercialization of deep tech and how companies like your guys is go into the market. You are the guy that's doing it. So can you speak to a little bit about your headspace around when you came in, how you assess the situation, how you came up with your plan, like you're segmenting your go to market, like you're saying, and then what are the steps you're taking now? As you said, like a new factory, things, production, hiring a team, things like this. Big question, but I'm just curious in your story of like, okay, I came in, I assessed the situation, I saw this, I made these decisions, this is why.
Yeah, so sets the stage. So for the last 4 companies I did, I was there about an average of 7 years. And I think what it shows that I'm not hopping around to different companies, but at some point, I think you go through an arc as an entrepreneur where you help build up an organization or a company, you're successful, you're repeatable, and at some point it becomes more like making popcorn and less about innovation. And I would say at the point I was at Logitech, I had achieved everything I wanted to, that I dreamed of achieving, beating Cisco and Polycom, becoming the incumbent, having $1 billion organization, having video conferencing work and being able to supply the world in the middle of the pandemic for COVID. Like that was, amazing and gratifying. Going through these incredible shortages where nobody could get any hardware, building stuff where nobody had ever really built stuff in China before without even being there. So accomplishing all these things and then getting to a point where the market was relatively mature. So I started looking around again, and then I found these brilliant developers and investors, and I think they were at a great point where I could come in and both make a difference and also complement their skills, and also maybe start the journey again, where you take a team that's got great raw materials or product, and then what you help figure out is how do you focus the company, how do you hire a team, how do you go from being an R&D team to commercialization. I think we're kind of I've been here 2 years. We're kind of at a really fun part of the journey where we're building things now, and it's not completely solved, but you can kind of see the contours of success and how we could become a multi-billion-dollar company. And I think some people can't see it, but I think for me, it's basically what we have to do is take this small scale product and build it bigger scale. We have to make it repeatable, rinse and repeat. You do that. There are companies out there that are worth tens of billions of dollars. And I think we could be, the next American champion for building solar panels and helping to solve climate change. I mean, how cool is that?
That's right. Well, so as far so you said one of the things is go from R&D to selling, revenue, commercialization, things like this. Like what does that transition look like? Are there best practices, or is it case by case?
Well, I'd say go back, focus, having a clear focus and a message that people can understand internally, externally, finding product market fit where you have value. In this case, what we found out is that the big utility scale solar developers really love the idea of having something that was both American made and at least 30% better. In the maybe in the software world that's not that big a deal, but in energy, 30% more energy is completely disruptive. And having the ability to have something lower cost. Then once you do that, then you need to convince some people to come on and work for you. You need to have some money to actually build out your dreams, because a dream without resources is a hallucination.
Yeah.
And then you have to prove to people that you can actually implement on the dream. So usually in the climate space, there's this phrase called the Valley of Death,
Okay.
which is where we just came from. And the Valley of Death means something like this: you can get money in an early stage for the lab idea. You can get money later stage when you're commercial and your customers are buying. But how do you convince people to give you tens of millions of dollars when your stuff is super risky? So what happens is a lot of climate companies get funded, and then they die, and they die for a whole bunch of reasons. One is they can't scale, they can't raise the money. Maybe the entrepreneurs don't have the same skill set that you needed to build something in the lab versus building up a company. And I'm really proud that we're one of a handful of companies that raised this money at least to bridge the Valley of Death. Now we have to get to the other side. We're not there yet, but we're on our way.
But you will be.
I think we will.
Yeah.
I mean, never
So
say it's 100% guaranteed. If it was, then that's part of the fun, right? It's hard.
yeah. Well, as far as, so I'm interested in, as at the beginning you discussed this concept of being confident in making decisions quickly, not like just whatever decisions like for the sake of quickness, but holding that as something that is valuable in the decision itself, is the amount of time it took to make that decision and then moving on. And I think deciding on a direction of focus as far as like a customer, a client, like a direction to go, a segment of the market, all of that stuff there, though you can choose to take forever. You can continue to gather more data, interview more people, like whatever. It is a decision, I think, that is very important and also needs to be made with a certain level of quickness. So how did you, like, was the approach of targeting these utility companies there when you got there, or is that something you arrived at within the last 2 years of you being there?
It was not there. That was not the strategy. Our strategy was really to sell more to residential customers with
Interesting.
rooftops. And the idea behind that, the conventional wisdom was in the company and in the industry, that your rooftop is more constrained for a home user than it is for utility scale. True. And that they tend to pay more. True. The downside of that thinking, there were a couple of them. One was the residential market in the U.S. is actually pretty small. So more than 80% of the market in the US goes to utility scale, less than 10% goes for home usage. So there
Hmm.
was a size issue. And then the customers in the residential side were actually less sophisticated. And then if you think about selling to someone's home, the sales process is actually quite complicated because you got to sell to the home installer, the sales engineer, the homeowner, and then maybe they have someone else living in the house that goes, "Oh, that's ugly," or "I don't want it." So it's actually a pretty complicated sales process. Whereas if we go to utility scale customers, they buy in huge quantities. They're very sophisticated buyers, and once you sell to them, you're done. They deploy it. So there's actually a much simpler go to market motion, even though it's harder. So what I would say is it was not the obvious answer, but part of it is we got some feedback from people on the residential side, and then we started getting feedback from the other one, and it became slowly obvious to us that one of them was going to be too hard, and the other one was more attractive. And then we just made a decision and leaned in with the idea that, well, the only way you're going to find out if you're wrong is to kind of make a bet. And then we did, and then what we found out, it's actually a really great fit for us, and these customers love our product, can't wait for us to get it. We'll buy it in almost unlimited quantities if we can figure out how to make it.
Okay. Okay. So then you arrived at that decision by you had there were the hypothesis existed. Somebody was from views from internal discussions, whatever the hypothesis existed, but you set up a framework to be able to gather the information to test the hypothesis, and then
Yeah.
like you said, slowly over time you collected the information to then go in that direction.
I would say it wasn't that slow. I mean, one of the pieces of advice I give for entrepreneurs and founders is they sometimes spend too much time planning internally,
Hmm.
and it's not that useful. At some point, you just need to go out into the real world. Like I hate stealth mode. I think it's the stupidest thing ever. Like if you can't explain your idea to people, if you're so afraid that the idea is so fragile that you tell it to somebody and they're going to steal it, then your idea is not worth anything because everyone else already knows about it, or it's got no barrier to entry. It's too easy to copy. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is you need to constantly be checking your idea to make sure it's right or wrong, and then calibrating it. So even though I talked about having this singular strategy, we've been calibrating the whole time about what's the size of the product, what are the dimensions of it, how do we who do we sell to and how and price. Like we're constantly going out there and testing and learning and building relationships with customers. Um, you can't learn that much from kind of hiding in your office or going to like you're just not learning anything. You have to go out there and put yourself out there and have people tell you, yes, this is a good idea or this is stupid. And then from there, it like constantly be calibrating, what, not the overall strategy, but how do you come up with the absolute right product?
Something that I think is so as far as like what we're speaking to bringing to market, something I think is so fascinating, especially in clean tech, climate tech, because it's so prevalent is regulatory environment. So how do you, as far as when you're thinking of a go to market plan, how do you feel about regulatory environments, the volatility of them? Where does that play as far as your guys' approach?
Well, it's annoying, especially with what's going on today, where there's a new
Yeah, sure.
policy literally like every day or every week. I would
Right,
say, look,
right.
you have to pick a business that's not an arbitrage opportunity. Like at the end of the day, if you have a business that has better economics and better physics, then you're going to find a way to get value and sell.
Okay, yeah.
That doesn't mean like in this case in energy, where the worldwide uh, governments and markets, they're all subsidized in some shape or form. So you need to be able to have some value within that, but you have to also have an underlying value that is better, and it can't be like 5% better. Otherwise, the incumbents will keep using what they're currently using. I mean, one of the ways I describe it is to entrepreneurs. I ask them, I go, "Is your solution a painkiller or a vitamin?"
Yeah.
And a vitamin is something that it's good for you, but if you don't take it, whatever, you just skip it. Whereas a painkiller, you're like, oh my God, I am bleeding. Like, what do you have to solve my problem? Like, I will give you anything to make me stop in pain. And what most entrepreneurs don't realize is that their solution is probably a painkiller. It's just not enough to get people to change their behavior. So you better be solving a pain point, a real pain point. And I'd say many entrepreneurs never just ask the question, why? Because they fall in love with their own solution.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So two of my thank you for I've heard of that I've heard of that metaphor before. It's a long time ago. I'm glad that you brought it back because I think it's cool and the vitamin versus painkiller thing. Two questions that are my favorite to ask is the first is what is the hurdle right now, the biggest hurdle that you're facing as far as growth, as far as any part of your company personally, and how is it also an opportunity?
Well, I'd say we have to do these two but hard things. We have to take our current lab size panels that are at the size of a tablet and make them to about the size of a door. So there's some engineering work. I'd say we've solved
Whoa.
most of the science of it, but there's some engineering work to make it bigger. That's number one. Number two, we have to be repeatable. So we've hit some of these high bars in terms of performance and durability, but we haven't been able to do it for every single time. So what we're working on is just making it less focus on experiments and more just focus on repeatability. If we do those two things, then money raising won't be a problem and customers won't be a problem because we'll be able to show it. But we have to just focus on doing those two but very difficult things. And we have to do them in a relatively quick time. It can't take 5 years, right? We got to do
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
as soon as possible.
Wow, quite an opportunity, man. You're literally creating a door that then you can open and walk through. So I love that.
Yeah, and
And
and the cool thing about it too is it's so what we're doing is really hard. It's one of the things I like about hardware, unlike software, that if you it's just really hard to copy it because you can't really reverse engineer it. And when you see someone doing so well in software, everybody can just throw money at it and copy it, and then you get like 20 AI agentic copycats. The barriers to entry are so high, and this because deep tech, it's very hard for someone to follow it. So I think that's kind of cool that eventually the barriers to entry get so high. Like at Logitech, it was like, well, if you don't have hundreds of millions of dollars, you can't play. Even the largest companies in the world will think twice about spending hundreds of millions of dollars and going into a new market.
well, doing something this hard, Scott, I'm interested in what it could be small, it could be overarching, but what inspires you?
Well, I think it's a good question to look back on your career. And for me, it was later in my career, it could be people in early career and say, what's important to you? And when you look back on whatever decision you made, how are you going to feel about it? Are you going to be proud that you made the decision? Or are you going to be like, yeah, I just stayed in this job because I was bored, lazy, wanted a little bit extra money? None of those things are bad. In my case, it was like I could have stayed at Logitech and continued to, run this incredible business with a team that I loved. But it wasn't really growing that much. Like the innovation level had kind of plateaued a little bit. Or I could look back and saying, look, I could take a risk. I could get a lot less money in the short term, but I could go out and maybe be potential the tip of the spear of solving climate change. I look back, go, yeah, I want to do that, and I'm lucky that I can do that. And even though it's a lot harder, it's really gratifying. And also the other thing is I got to learn a whole new business and come in and I think there's some people say you have to only stay in your one business because you can't do it. Well, I'm showing like you can pivot to different industries, and if you're intellectually curious and learn, you can do other things. Um, and I think that's part of the fun part too. Now I'm an expert in solar, moving over from video conferencing, and there are a lot of commonalities, but there are a lot of things I had to learn. But quite frankly, that's been part of the fun part of the journey.
Well, and I think something I draw inspiration from is the amount of learning, curiosity, challenge that you've expressed. So thank you for doing that. If there's anyone else that is inspired by your story, wants to connect or follow your guys' growth, what's the best way to do that?
I guess find me on LinkedIn,
That's
Scott
right.
Wharton, Tandem PV.
Tandem PV, Scott Wharton, LinkedIn. I think it's so worth it. I think what you guys are doing is so cool. I'm definitely going to, stay in touch with how you guys are doing. Thank you so much for coming on to give a little bit of your story. I'm so excited for the next episode and to hear about all you guys' progress, to see how that door is coming along.
Yeah, so am I. Me too. Thanks for having me, Blake. Enjoy the conversation.
You got it. Appreciate it, Scott.
Take care.